Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's webinar. Promise to start promptly on 7:15. I'll just do a bit of an intro. There's a few people still signing on as we speak. My name's Alistair Morris, as hopefully you can see on the slide, and tonight we're going to be talking a little bit about how to write a high-impact interview-winning CV as advertised. This evening's webinar is a audio-only broadcast, and it's one way. So the only thing that should be happening is you should be able to hear me. You can't see me, I can't see you, and I can't hear you. So if you've got any questions that you want to ask, and normally there are quite a few, just type it into the question facility you have on your GoToWebinar taskbar, which will be somewhere on your screen. And then at the end of the session, I'll take a look through as many questions as possible. I can normally address most issues and hit them one by one. And so for those that need to rush off, by all means, when we've done, you can disappear. But if anybody wants to hang on, whether you've asked a question or not, but you want to listen to the answers and some of the other questions being raised by your fellow delegates, then by all means hang on as long as you like, and I'll let you know when we're about to shut the thing down and go off and enjoy the rest of the evening. So today's all going to be about primarily about how to write a high-impact interview-winning CV, but we are, if time permits, and it should do, going to talk a little bit about LinkedIn as well, because the two things these days, a good LinkedIn profile and a good effective CV, are pretty critical. The two go hand in hand if you're out there looking for opportunities. And some of the things we're going to talk about in terms of content, and it's going to be a lot of stuff we're going to cover this evening, so that's why I offered to answer any questions, because I may rush through a few bits and pieces. I would stress that if there's anything you want to deal with on a one-to-one basis, then you can see our website domain down the bottom of the screen. By all means, take a look at our website, contact us via email, give us a call anytime after this webinar. If you've got any particular issues you want to discuss, more than happy to deal with them on a one-to-one basis. But as I say, any questions, then plug them away in the box that you've got on your GoToWebinar taskbar. And so some of the things that we're going to talk about this evening are how to align your CV with the hot skills in a particular marketplace. Obviously, I can't deal with every single marketplace, but I'll talk about the principles. We'll talk about how to create a CV that does genuinely make a difference, open doors in effect. And essentially, if there's one phrase you need to take away from this evening, and it will get repeated more than once, it's about how to transform what you might take as just being an ordinary, taken for granted CV, and actually transform it into what we'd call a strong business case as to why somebody should hire you. And there is a massive difference, as you'll find out this evening. And then how to harness key bits of information within your CV to make sure particularly the first page and the first half of the first page are doing you justice and really creating the right impression. So I'm sure there'll be some skeptics amongst us, there normally are, in terms of what difference does a good CV make, but I promise you there's plenty of evidence out there to prove it. Companies like us wouldn't exist if we couldn't make a difference and provide advice and guidance, and it's staggering sometimes what a difference a well-targeted, well-written CV can make to an individual's prospects. And again, hopefully we'll touch on some of that during the course of this evening. I'll first talk just very briefly about who on earth we are, because you've been invited via Webrecruit to attend this evening's webinar. It's a free webinar. You're under no obligations to do anything, and we will be giving you a lot of information about how to write a good CV. But just briefly, in terms of a bit of plug into it, in terms of who on earth CV and interview advisors are, we're completely unrelated to Webrecruit. We're an independent business, and we exist to provide high-quality CV writing and career enhancement products. What do we mean by career enhancement? It's everything to do with getting a job. The CV's part of it, LinkedIn's increasingly part of it, interview coaching's part of it, things like that, anything that helps people get jobs and interviews. In terms of my own background, just so you understand, I'm not going to stand here and say that I know everything about everybody and every circumstance, but I have been a recruiter. I've been in corporate life, actually. I've been a recruiter. I've been a CV reviewer, still am, and a CV writer, less so these days, but still do a bit of that as well. The message being, I've seen how CVs are used in a variety of environments, both as a recruiter within employment, as a recruiter doing a recruitment consultant role, and then working with the CV and interview advisors, looking at CVs that come into us, and improving them and sending them to our clients who've paid us to write their CVs. And we've worked with a lot of recruiters to see how things work, how the technology impacts on CVs, how people use LinkedIn. So we see how the process operates at some detailed level, and I'll try and get some of the key points across this evening. In terms of who my colleagues are and what they get up to, all very similar. Interestingly, one of the common denominators, which it's not that big a surprise, but may surprise you, that we have a lot of published authors within our business who are really good at writing CVs. And I suppose it goes hand in hand with strong content makes a difference. And so we have some of those people within our business. In terms of some of the practical values that we can bring, and again, hopefully impart to you this evening, it is a really competitive world out there, whether you're based in the UK or outside, whatever sector you're in, with very few exceptions, it's really competitive out there. A lot of people looking for jobs. Not all of those people are valid applicants. Nevertheless, they create noise in the system. People applying for jobs creates activity, work. It's really important these days to know what your target audience are looking for. Again, that message will come across loud and clear this evening. We know, to a large degree, within particular sectors of the market, what people are looking for, because that's what we do day in, day out. If you don't know what the hot skills are in your marketplace, and it is a bit of a cliche, but it's the best way to describe what's topical right now, that will be a hindrance. You need to know what people are looking for, what will excite them about you and your CV. And if you don't know that, it is definitely one of those things you need to sort and resolve somehow. And we'll look at some of the ways of going about that later. It is a bit crude, but ultimately we'd like to think that people who can write CVs that smash down doors. Sounds a bit aggressive, but it is competitive out there. We're not here to make people look beyond their abilities. We're not here to make people, and we wouldn't recommend that people go out with a CV that's blatantly untrue or bending the truth. That's not what it's about. What it is about is really understanding what the people who are looking at your CV are actually looking for, looking at the individual and their abilities, and matching the two as best you can. So if you're currently, I don't know, a salesman, a teacher, a nurse, a doctor, and you're looking to become a nuclear submarine captain, there are limits to what CV can do. But assuming that you've got skills and you're applying for jobs that require those skills, you'll be amazed at the difference a well-constructed CV can make. And that's what we're about. That's what we do in our business. So that's a little bit about who on earth we are. More importantly, may seem a bit of a strange and obvious question, but one of the things I wanted to discuss is what on earth a CV is as well, because all sorts of people have all sorts of views about this. Historically, I would imagine most people approach their CV and they construct it as if it were a list. And that may seem very obvious and self-evident, and in the olden days, whenever they may have been, probably right. And so typically people would build up a document that was a list of jobs they'd performed or held, qualifications that they'd strived for, and contact details in terms of how people would get hold of them if they were interested. And that might be how your CV currently looks. But for those of you who have ever filled out a rather daunting, typically internet-led application form, particularly within the public sector, so anybody who's applied to join the police, NHS, or any division of the NHS, you'll be familiar with these kind of things, or education, and increasingly some large corporate employers in the private sector. If you've ever had to fill out one of these rather large, wieldy or unwieldy application forms, you'll notice that often they're asking for information that you find difficult possibly to provide because it isn't on your CV already, and it's stuff that you find maybe hard to try and word and package and even think of good examples to put on the application form. And there's a reason for that, and that's because employers typically find a traditional CV as a list of things being wholly useless for the purposes of recruitment. So that's a warning sign. If you find it difficult to fill out the application forms, it's not because the employer is necessarily being or wanting to be difficult. They're wanting to access information that they're pretty sure they wouldn't ordinarily get on a CV. And that is a great indicator that your CV is maybe not where it should be. And so that's one of the big changes over the last few years. Another problem, which is a good indicator as to whether your CV is appropriate or not, is whether you're effectively using the same kind of format as you did when you left whatever education you left. So if you came out of school and started work or college or university, and then you've just built up a document and added to it over time, I can virtually guarantee that's an ineffective document right now, and it's not doing you a lot of good. So I said I'd repeat it. Now, this is the first time it gets repeated. Our view is, and it's been proven out in the field, so to speak, is that your CV and the way you should treat your CV should be that it ought to present your target audience with a strong business case as to why they should hire you. And there's a massive difference between sending them a list of things that you've done and actually presenting them with a strong business case as to why somebody should hire you. And this is where you really start to imagine yourself as a product or service. Some people will already do that. A lot of contractors, if there are any contractors out there this evening, you probably have more of a view on this and maybe believe this to be true for longer than most permanent employees. But for both camps, it's the same message. You need to present your target audience, whoever you're applying jobs to, whoever they may be they recruiters or employers directly or a combination of the two. You need to go to market presenting a strong business case as to why they should hire you, not leave it to their imagination, because that would tend not to work very well. We'll go into the detail of this and how you actually achieve this objective later. So, unsurprisingly, a bad CV is just a list of things. So if you look at your CV right now, you're imagining it in your mind, if it really is just here's where I was educated, these are the companies I've worked with, these are the responsibilities, duties, tasks that I was given within the jobs, this is where I live, and these are some of my sort of hobbies and interests, that would tend to indicate it's an ineffective document. We'll come on to a bit of a caveat in a minute, but generally speaking, an ineffective document. A good CV, one will actually say to your target audience, as a consequence of considering me for the job, if I were hired, these are the kind of benefits that would accrue. So that's a wholly different positioning. Other big change over recent years is that the importance of structuring your CV to work well in the internet and database-driven world that we live. So if your CV is old, by definition because you started it a few years back when you came out of education, and you've not really kept in with the trends and how these things work in an electronic world, again, you're probably doing yourself a disservice, and the document needs to be structured in a way that works well with databases, job boards, etc. I said there might be a bit of a caveat. So there are some people out there with almost unique or incredibly valuable skills that, metaphorically speaking, they're so valuable that they could write them on a piece of toilet paper, stick that piece of paper into CEO's letterbox, for example, of a business that wanted those skills, and they might well get an interview. It's rare, but it sometimes does happen. Case in point, if you whiz back a few years to the turn of the millennium, if you were in IT and you could solve somebody's Y2K problem, for those old enough to understand what that was all about, chances are you could have done exactly that. You would have got an interview purely on the basis of word of mouth, the proverbial piece of toilet paper, or some other bizarre activity. It's less likely that would happen these days, but there are some people with truly valuable skills. For most people, they're in amongst a pool of people who've got similar skills. If you don't differentiate yourself well enough, chances are you won't get the interview, and the CV is pretty much the only way most people can differentiate themselves in the early part of the job application process. So the acid test, I've written in bold here, and another big lesson to take away if you haven't already sussed this one out yourselves, is that irrespective of the situation economically, irrespective of the number of jobs you've applied for, irrespective of the state of the economy or any dynamic, if you're applying for even one job, let alone 10, 20 or whatever, and you know you can perform it, and you're not getting interviews to a satisfactory level, then you can pretty much guarantee the CV is the cause of your problems. Got nothing to do with you individually, because nobody knows you from Adam, generally speaking. It's got pretty much everything to do with however that message that you sent somebody on your CV has been interpreted. So, absolute bottom line, whatever I or anybody else tells you about your CV at any time in the future, the acid test is whether it's actually getting you interviews. So if you've got a CV, and I might judge it to be a bit ropey, possibly substandard, but you're still getting interviews and ultimately job offers, there ain't a lot wrong with your CV. Magic numbers should be, if you're getting, let's say you have applied for 10 jobs, again, it's assuming that they're jobs you know you could perform. It might be a bit of a stretch, but you're a relevant, valid applicant for those jobs. If you've applied for 10 of them, and you're getting, say, 8, 9 interviews out of 10, even 7 interviews out of the 10, it's a real struggle to justify why you should consider doing anything with your CV. It's doing its job, it's doing a good job. If, however, you're getting no interviews for the 10 applications, 1, 2 or 3 out of 10 interviews out of 10 applications, there's something wrong with the CV. There are sometimes other reasons, but by and large it's the CV that's letting you down. Now, you'll get views back from recruiters, employers, which will give you all sorts of reasons and rationale as to why you weren't put forward for interview, but it all boils down to the same thing. People will very rarely say, I'm sorry, your CV was awful and you're not going to get an interview. Well, we couldn't see the benefit of what interviewing you would bring to our client or us as a business. You might get people venture that far to suggest that you really didn't put a strong case forward, but by and large you'll be given a load of waffle and reasons that maybe aren't strictly true. So focus on the stats. You're getting the interviews and you're happy with that, your CV's doing its job. Not getting the interviews or not a satisfactory level of interviews, it's pretty much the CV. Whether anybody's brave enough to tell you that and explain the details is another issue. But then you at least know you need to do something, and we'll come on to what that something is in a minute. For those, again, if there are cynics out there in terms of, well, how much difference can a well-written CV make? Sometimes it's quite staggering. Sometimes the difference can be somebody applying for literally 400, 500 jobs one day, and then getting interviews the next with a different CV, but it's the same individual. But on average, based on the results that we collate, bearing in mind there's lots of people out there who write CVs, claim to write CVs, and there's some individuals who, if they sat down and did the job themselves, they could make a much better job of their CV given enough time and effort. Generally speaking, if you prepare your document to your target audience's needs, you will see an uplift in a strong double-digit region. Typically, we see 30 to 50% increase in success, i.e. people suddenly getting that much more interview attraction. It can be that dramatic. So for some people it's the difference between struggling to get any attention at all and then suddenly getting some attention. For some people it's black and white. It literally is. One day of having problems, next day it solved the problems. It's very hard to be generic about it because everybody's different, but it generally makes a big difference if you get the job done properly. I'm going to take a look now at how, having set sort of the goalposts, as it were, you need to build yourself a business case. We're going to look at how you build that business case, and shortly I'll show you sort of a real-life example of how we would write a CV to fit the criteria that I'm just about to talk about. And there are a couple of assumptions I'm making this evening, so if there's anybody that falls outside the sort of the average, as it were, then more than happy to deal with any questions afterwards or on a one-to-one basis some other time. But the main assumption here is that we're talking about people who are probably looking for permanent work or are contractors that deal with recruiters who don't really understand the contract market. For out-and-out contractors, if there are any out there, out-and-out contractors who work with recruiters or apply directly to employers who really do understand the contract market, there is a slightly different way of structuring the CV, which requires a different conversation, to be honest. But if you're a short-term, or you've been doing contracting for a little while, or if you're a permanent employee, then all of what I say from now on is particularly valid and appropriate. Now, I've said that we should start and make sure the CV effectively becomes a strong business case as to why somebody should hire you. So our view is that you should then open your CV, other than having your name at the top of it and maybe some way of getting hold of you. But other than that, the very first thing that you should be providing on page 1 of the CV is what we would call a professional or an executive summary. It doesn't really matter what you call it, it's the content that matters and makes the difference. And it may seem very simple, but you'll know whether you're fitting the criteria or not. The very first thing you need to be saying to your target audience is, in effect, what are you? So if you're a salesperson or a business development professional, you want to be making that very clear on the CV, as blunt as, in effect, an experienced sales professional, business development person. If you're a teacher, you need to be stating you're a teacher and at what level of education you're working in, and whether that's state or independent. If you're a doctor, what level and what's the area of specialism. If you're in IT, are you a project manager, business analyst, tester? In effect, you're reflecting, or you ought to be reflecting, pretty much what the company or recruiter is actually looking for. You'd be amazed, and you'll know yourselves, how many people don't actually make it obvious to the reader of their CV what on earth they are. And I'd say probably 2/3 to 3/4 of the CVs that I look at every single day of the week that are sent in to us for a review, it's very hard sometimes to figure out what that person actually is. Most people assume way too much. So they assume that somebody will read their CV all the way through, and when they get to the bit about who they're working for and the job they're performing, it'll automatically make sense. The person will infer that that job title must mean something to them, and they just assume that all is well in the world. And I'm afraid you don't have that much luxury of time for the average job application. So make it very clear, and I'll show you an example shortly, very clear what you are, either by job title or generic phrase, so that the reader of your CV is under no doubt about what you might be, and that you are a valid applicant at the end of the day. Always remember that you will be up against lots of people who have applied for the same job who are not in any way qualified to perform it. Most people don't recognise that. They assume they're always up against competition that is as well qualified, if not better qualified, or similarly qualified for the job, and that's not the case. Probably a good third of the applicants for every job you apply for are probably at worst time wasters, and at best just not right. Good individuals, but not right or appropriate. So don't get caught up in all that noise by not making it clear as to what you actually are and that you are a valid applicant for the role. Again, a bit of a cliche, I'm afraid. The other thing you need to be getting across pretty quickly, bearing in mind this is an opening paragraph on the top of your CV, what is your value proposition? Firstly, what on earth does that mean? Well, in effect, this is the business case bit. This is, why on earth should somebody bother to consider your application? What have you got to offer the world? So if you're describing yourself as a salesperson, you better pretty quickly explain that you might be able to knock down new customer doors, or that you're very good at managing existing business. If you're a project manager, that you're particularly adept at managing projects of a certain size or in a particular sector. As I said earlier, if you're a doctor or a nurse, you've got certain skills in particular areas. So make it very clear as quickly as possible the kind of benefits that may accrue from hiring you or considering to be hired by that employer or via a recruiter. Link to that things that you're particularly good at. Typically, we'd suggest a handful, 4 or 5 things that you're strong at in your given field. The clever bit here is you need to make sure they're relevant for your target audience. So again, it needs a little bit of research and thought. If you're always going for the same kind of job, this becomes much easier, of course, because you can repeat the process. You need to be making it clear some of the good things that you can bring to that employer's party, as it were. And I know I mentioned this a bit earlier, but these infamous hot skills come back to play. As I hinted at, all of the content you talk about needs to be aligned to what the target audience is excited by. again, you'll be surprised how many people go to market with the same CV. Worse than that, say CV is so generic, you could use loads of the content and it could apply to me, it could apply to the candidate's sister, brother, uncle, father, the bloke they might meet down at the pub, all sorts of people. That's a bad sign. The text in this professional summary, this opening summary, needs to be very specific to you, differentiating you from pretty much everybody else in the marketplace, or at least most applicants you're up against, and very specific for the needs of whoever's reading the CV. So it takes time, it takes thought, and it is hard work sometimes, but it has to be done. I promised an example. So on the screen you should just be seeing now a paragraph. It looks a bit chunkier than it would on the CV because it's larger text and takes up a bit more space. And I'll let you read this at your own leisure. I'm not going to read it verbatim, but see how this, for a particular senior finance person, happen to be a finance director, you can see how it addresses the points we've just talked about. So this would appear at the top of the CV, under the person's name, and it's addressing the what are they, an experienced finance director, what's their value proposition, it's the bit about protecting cash flow and profitability, what are they particularly good at, that follows the key strengths comment and is the bulk of that particular paragraph, so the whole middle bit, right up until pretty much the last sentence. And we're assuming that whatever this person has put on their CV would be aligned with the hot skills. We don't know because we don't know who the individual is and we don't know what they're applying for, other than probably quite senior level finance roles. But everybody at any level, in any role, in any country could write something like this about themselves. And you'll notice one other interesting thing, it contains nothing, and I bet you there's some of you out there who've got in their opening statement, if they have such a thing, it contains nothing about enthusiasm, dedication, commitment, passion, being able to work as an individual or as part of a team, all of those great skills to have once you're in a job, but wholly pointless to put on your CV, because how on earth does anybody tell whether you're more or less enthusiastic than anybody else? How does anybody know whether you would truly work well in a team or as an individual, and how do you prove that on your CV? You'll notice all the content in this particular paragraph is factual. There are ways that all of that information could be proven on the CV, as we'll sort of see later, but you'll have to take my word for it, and it probably is obvious from the reading the text that anything that's mentioned there could actually be proven somehow on the CV, and that's really important. So if you've got an opening statement, whether you've called it a profile, a career objective, a professional summary, a professional profile, a personal profile, whatever you've called it, if you've got anything in there about stuff that you can't actually prove on the CV, that is a bad sign. And all that happens is that the recruiter or hiring manager will scan it, their eyes will glaze over, they'll say, here we go again, just like everybody else who's just applied for this job, and there's a real risk you'll get rejected right at that moment in time. And if there are a lot of applicants for the role, i.e. more than 50 or so, you might get rejected. And it doesn't matter that you're a valid applicant for the job in your eyes, it doesn't matter that you actually might technically be the right person for the job. You'll get rejected because, truth be told, the recruiter or hiring manager just can't be bothered. They know somewhere in that pile of CVs will be the right person or persons to interview, and they only need 2 or 3 to interview. And they'll skip you if you happen to be early on in the process and you've just provided them with a whole heap of, in effect, rubbish, to be crude, stuff that can't help the recruiter, can't help the employer. They've seen it all before, they get tired of seeing it, and they'll just discount you. You'll never find out the true reason, of course, but that will be the stats. And remember what I said earlier, if you get in the interviews to a satisfactory level, your CV is obviously doing its job. If you're not getting the interviews, it's possibly because at this early stage you're just getting rejected because that first scan, that first 5 to 20 seconds that you're going to get of somebody's attention, the first thing they see is just meaningless. Same old, me too, generic stuff. And there's a real risk you just get sidelined at that moment in time. And that'll be it, game over. So our argument is to try and prevent that from happening, make it abundantly clear what you are, what have you got to offer the world and this particular employer, and is that matched well against their expectations as best you can judge them. And if you get them right, you stand a much better chance of somebody progressing and taking your CV and application a little bit further. Okay, so I've gone on a bit about that. As I said, any questions, obviously plug away in the box, but that would be how you'd open up a CV. I'm going to show you one more section, and then I'll come back to a real-life example to show you how it all sort of hangs together. So, for the purposes of our imaginary CV at the moment, we're talking about a senior finance person. We describe what they're good at. There's something else we need to talk about before we get into any detail. And we call that key skills or areas of expertise. It's a nifty little way of providing your audience with a bullet-pointed menu of some of the key skills that you have to offer the world. Again, I'll show you some examples very soon. But it's also a cunning way of making sure that your CV is populated with phrases and words that we know people are searching for on the internet, be that via LinkedIn, job board database, internal recruiter databases, whatever electronic means it may be, even Google sometimes if your CV is publicly stored anywhere. But by getting this section right, it makes your CV electronically a lot more visible than it may otherwise be. Give you a few examples here. They're just 2, 3, 4 word stretch bullet points, and we'd ordinarily be putting, I don't know, I guess somewhere between 5 to 14 bullet points on your CV. That's what we recommend. Too many and it just looks horrendous. Too few and it looks like a half-hearted attempt. The magic number is somewhere between 5 and 7 on the left, 5 and 7 on the right. So there'd be 2 columns, so between 10 and 14 bullets. And they'd be things like you can see on the screen. So imagining, again, we're talking about this senior finance person. So some of the things are linked to that. Yeah, there's no rocket science here. They're just phrases and words that we know get searched well for and that probably reflect the job spec or advertisement that you might have seen for that particular job or type of jobs. And again, therein lies a bit of a clue. There's no point in just putting a random list of words and phrases that have no meaning, and certainly you want to avoid putting things like interpersonal skills, communication skills, presentation skills. Those are things, again, they're very hard to prove on the CV. Most people tend to mention them, but they're not actually doing you any good whatsoever. That's not what you're going to get employed for. These are examples of things that people are more interested in. So they're specific, they're demonstrable, they're factual, they're functional. That's really important. Strip out all the behavioural stuff. So as I said earlier about the opening paragraph you have, if you're going on about how wonderful you are at communicating and presenting to the world and how you can work in a team or in splendid isolation, all lovely stuff, but when you're actually in employment, totally irrelevant to getting you the interview. Same applies to this area. Functional, factual, demonstrable. That's the sort of narrative you need to follow. Now, interestingly, at the bottom in red, you'll see a comment which may seem bleeding obvious to most people, but again, a bit of an important message lurks behind this, and that is the vast majority, over 90% of recruiters or hiring managers, will make the decision on shortlisting for interview based on the content of your CV. And you may think, well, of course, how else are they going to do it? And that, in a way, that's exactly the message. So many people, too many people, go to market with a CV that presents too many assumptions to the world or doesn't address what the target audience is looking for. They don't have a crystal ball. And for those mathematically minded of you, the difference between 100% and 92% are things like where the recruiter may know you or the employer knows you, or they've used some other source like word of mouth or a reference to get hold of you. So that does sometimes help and work to your advantage, but in the vast majority of cases, the only means that anybody, a third party, has of judging whether you're right for the role or not and to interview you is your CV, and increasingly, I would have to say, LinkedIn. And we'll come on to that later, though. So if your CV is not getting across that message, how on earth can the recruiter or hiring manager make the right decision about you? And the answer, of course, is they can't. So they then tend to make the wrong decision about you, which for your own personal needs may be bad news. So it's really important to get this first part of the page one correct and align it to what the target audience is expecting. And then, surprise, surprise, all of those good things I was talking about earlier in terms of getting more interviews will, as if by magic, start to happen. Because the person picking up your CV will be actually quite relieved that somebody's bothered to think about their circumstances, their environment, their requirements, rather than you approaching it from all the good things you think you've got to offer but are totally misaligned to what your target audience is expecting to see. And that's the big difference. You narrow that gap, you start to get interviews. If you widen the gap, you just won't get the interest you're expecting. Okay, so I promised to show you an example of how this might sort of stitch together, and I'll do exactly that. So appearing on the screen, just a little while, so some people can see it, some people can't. I think everybody's got it now. Matt Craven happens to be the guy that runs our business, so this is a real CV, but of course it's regarding his circumstances. And what you should see on your screen right now is the top third of page one of his CV. Don't worry right now about the sort of formatting and style, because that's not the most important thing in the great scheme of things. The content is important, and the structure of the document that I want to focus on. So one thing you'll notice, and I'll come on to this later as to why, there's no mention of where Matt lives. There's no address. There's nothing about his education or his marital status or his date of birth or any of that stuff. It's not that that's not important, but it doesn't make any difference as to whether you get an interview or not, and that's how you need to view it. And as I say, I'll explain and justify that a little bit later. What does make a difference is, of course, we do need to know who this candidate is by name, and ideally, yes, you'd want to know how to get hold of them, because if you're interested in them, I guarantee the one thing a recruiter will want to do, or an employer, will pick up the phone or grab the keyboard and send an email and get hold of the individual that has all these amazing talents. So you'll see we've talked about already the executive or the professional summary, and on screen you can see Matt's. So it is relevant to him, it's real life information, and it just shows you again, it doesn't matter who you are, at what level, whatever you're doing, whether you've just graduated or whether you've got 50 years experience, everybody can write a strong opening statement about what they are, what the value proposition is, what they're good at, and it's very easy to do that once you apply with a thought. You'll then notice the bullet points that I mentioned just at the base of the screenshot you've got. In Matt's case, we've got, I think it was 7 either side, so it's sort of stretching it to about the maximum you'd want to put. And it just contains some of the things that he knows he's strong at, and that we happen to know are areas that people search for. So things like people management, recruitment strategy, seminars, interview coaching, outplacement, they're things that people in this kind of world would search for, or visually would want affirmation of ability. Now, as I said, you need to be able to prove some of these things, and we'll talk about that later. But take it from me, anything that you put in here, or that we would put in here, would be, or could be, proven at some stage later, and that's important. Again, you'll notice there's nothing here about enthusiasm, dedication, commitment, passion, ability to work as an individual or as a team. I'm sorry to go on about those things, but you'd be surprised how many people have them on their CVs, and they just do it, I suspect, because that's what they've already done it, and maybe they've seen it on other people's CVs. That doesn't, unfortunately, make it right. And you'll know if you do that yourselves, and I would stress the first thing you do is get rid of all that nonsense, because it's not helping your cause. So we've got here a tight, well-written opening statement. We've got some bullet points. It's starting to build this business case. That's one of the things you can see. It's beginning to send a message that this particular individual, here we've got Matt, has got something to offer the world. He's actually presenting that case. Got to go on to prove it, which we'll come on to in a minute, but we're beginning to build that case, and that's the important message. Okay, so talked a lot, not got much way down the CV yet, so I'm hoping you can see it's actually quite a complicated process. It gets a bit better shortly when we've gone through some of the detail on how we prove these skills and abilities that you have as a candidate. It's not indicative of how long the rest of the process is going to take, but it is quite detailed. You get this bit right, page 1 right, make a huge difference to your chances in the marketplace. So far we've talked about the opening statement, the professional summary, we've talked about the bullet point area. So the next bit that's important when we're writing CVs is that we better go on and actually prove some of these abilities. So we're starting to build the business case, but so far there's been no real evidence to back up the statements made. Now most people's CVs tend to fall down on this front as well. Not only do they not really give any clues as to what the value that individual could bring to a particular business, but they actually don't go on to prove anything later anyway. Most people's CVs are quite light of achievements or ability or proof of ability. And in the current climate, there's just no way that that's going to be sustainable. If you're in a particular role, again, if we look at sales, if you don't go on to actually prove on your CV how good you are at selling things, sales directors, general managers, commercial directors will just say, well, if they're not bothering to put something on their CV which is core to what they do and how they earn their living, I'm not interested in them. It's that blunt. They'll not tell you that to your face, but that's what they'll be thinking. If you're a project manager and you can't actually demonstrate any projects that you've managed, the level at which you've managed them, the value of them, the ability to deliver to time and to budget, again, you'll face probably a tough time trying to get people's interest, because there's plenty of folk out there who'll be bothering to take the time to explain how they can achieve things and deliver things. So you ought to be doing the same kind of thing, and we build a section on the CV that we tend to call career highlights, which gives some examples of your abilities in this area, in your skill areas. The important things here is that you need to be able to write about stuff that you've done. There's a few challenges here. You need to know what you've done and be able to articulate it, and you need to be able to think about the relevance of those highlights in your career, which ones to pick. Now, we use a methodology which is not something that's unique to us. It's an acronym that many people might be familiar with. We call it STAR, and the STAR stands for, as you can see, situation, task, actions, result. It's a really good way of breaking down sometimes very complex events, projects, achievements, happenings in your life, and either on paper, writing them in a nice, concise manner, and I'll show you an example shortly, or at interview, being able to deal with these sometimes rather tricky competency-based questions. And if you get into the habit of breaking down things that you've done into these kind of 4 compartments, it makes both tasks a lot easier. It takes a bit of practice, but it does help. I'll show you an example. This is one off Matt's CV, as we'll see in a short while, actually. So if you remember Matt's CV, we had that opening statement and we had some bullet points, and then underneath we'd have a section with typically three career highlights. Things that he'd done that he was particularly proud of, yes, but that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is the highlights that you pick are relevant to your target audience and relevant to the kind of skills that they'll be looking for proof of. So in this case, again, I won't read it verbatim, you can look at that yourself, but this paragraph is one career highlight of Matt's life, and it's broken down, although you can't see the defining lines, I'll explain them to you, into the 4 compartments: the situation, the task, the actions, and the result. So in this particular case, the situation is, in effect, the background, and that is that ERAC, that stands for Enterprise Rent-A-Car, not that that's important, but just so you know. So Enterprise Rent-A-Car acquired an unprofitable competitor that required transformation. That's the situation. That's explained to the average person very succinctly and clearly. That was the background. That's why this thing existed as an issue. The task is the responsibility that lay on Matt's shoulders, and that he was appointed as an operations manager to do a variety of things, which you can see for yourself. The actions are the bulk of that paragraph. So everything from performed down to the last sentence, the penultimate sentence, I should say, are things that he did, the actions that Matt took to resolve the situation. and to help him with the task and responsibilities on his shoulders. And then the final sentence is the result, and that is that he succeeded in effect rebranding the business and achieving a level of profitability within a particular time scale that would seem to most people to be quite an achievement. So that's how you take something that obviously it took Matt 6 months to do this. It's probably quite complex, it involved lots of people, probably a few sleepless nights, but he's condensed that into a very brief, concise paragraph which clearly demonstrates an ability to do something. Now, we have to assume that if he were putting this on his CV and applying for a job, that of course he's using it because it's relevant to the target audience, and so that's key. There's no point in just picking things that you feel best about because you like doing them. You've got to pick things that are going to impress your target audience, the people reading your CV. And so part of the skill is judging what they're actually looking for. If you just randomly pick 3 things that you're quite pleased with, again, you run the risk of appearing to have given no consideration to your potential employer, which is never a good thing. So, what I'm suggesting is that on your CV, if you're going to go about it and build this business case, you start with a paragraph that explains what on earth you are and what you're good at. You've given some bullet points on areas that you're strong in, and then you're providing examples, 3 examples typically. There's a reason for that, which I'll show you later. 3 examples that help prove it with real-life examples. Now, most people tend not to have this on their CV, or if they have it, it's buried deep in the chronological order of what they've done and where they've done it. And if it goes beyond the first page of your CV, there's a huge risk that nobody will ever get to see it. So always remember, you've roughly got, if there are more than, I'd say, 50 applicants for a job, and you're one of them, you've probably got 5 to 20 seconds of somebody's time before they make an initial decision on whether you even progress further in the process. If you haven't secured their interest in that 5 to 20 seconds, which is somewhere down the first page of your CV, they'll not go any further. There'll be a few exceptions to that, but not many. If they've only had maybe 5 or 10 applicants, you might get your CV properly looked at. But in most other cases, you just won't. So the argument about, yeah, but it's all on my CV and it's on page 7 or page 3 or page 2 down the bottom there, or buried somewhere on page 9, none of that washes. You'll never get anybody reading that far. You've got to have all the important stuff on page 1, very visible, part of a story, building a case as to why somebody should hire you, and relevant to your target audience's needs. And if you're hitting those marks, you stand a much better chance of getting interest. People then may read a little bit further on your CV. They may not, but if they've made the decision that you're part of the interview process, it doesn't matter how far they read. If they've said, yeah, get this person in, job done. So this is the important part, thinking of what those highlights should be. But there are some areas of caution, which I've sort of hinted at. You've got to pick strong examples, relevant examples. If not, you'll lose the interest of the reader. And if they're weak examples, it might actually indicate that they're more of a failure than an achievement, which obviously is not a good thing. You've got to be able to, as far as possible, because not everybody does have a job that results in great achievements or conclusions, but as much as possible, try and get some kind of angle on the result or conclusion. So in that example I showed you just, Matt turned around the profitability of a business unit within a relatively short space of time. So that's the KPI, the key performance indicator. Some people don't have jobs like that. Some people can't actually put their hand on their heart and say, well, actually I was responsible for that, I actually made the difference. That's fine. It doesn't matter, because chances are you'll be applying for jobs that the expectation is lower. But you can still probably find an angle to say, yes, but by doing this and being involved in something, I actually improved the projects as a whole, or as part of being a cog in a very large machine, I was able to effect an improvement. You need to be able to put some kind of conclusion, result, positive nature to each of the career highlights that you pick. For those people that find this particularly difficult, and strangely, given that the individual ought to be the best person to give examples, you'd be surprised how many people come to us and they find it really hard to think of relevant career highlights. And this is also where we earn our money. So people that choose to work with us, we help people with this. We actually take them through a process to say, okay, you've been doing this kind of job, that's fine. Okay, so there must have been examples of when you did X, Y, and Z, and they'll say, yes, there were, and suddenly the light will come on and they'll think, ah, yeah, there was this time when such and such happened and I had to do this. And then it's almost as if this light does appear and they suddenly remember a whole heap of good stuff and will tease it out of them. But if you're doing it yourself, as I say, just make sure you're picking strong examples and that they're relevant to what your audience is expecting to see, not just random things you think are good but actually aren't that valuable. Comment at the bottom just as a reminder, if you're out there with your CV, if you're not getting the interviews, and I'm sorry to keep going on about this, but it is really important, if you're not getting the interviews, you need to do something about your CV, and the decision about what to do is either you fix it yourself or you get somebody to help you, but at least come to the point where you're making that decision and don't just let it ride on and just recognise the fact that your CV is not performing. Right, before we go into, and funnily enough you'll realise now that we're finally, after having talked for some time now, we're finally about to talk about what you're actually doing and where you've been doing it in some kind of order. It seems such a long time since we began in some regards, only to get to this point, but this is really important, and it is all about building the business case. Remember, we're still on page 1 of the CV. We've not gone beyond it yet, and I'll show you Matt's example again, just to prove the point. So just bear with me for those people. I've just now started to get through a refresh screen with Matt's CV in slightly more detail now, hopefully. So you can see we've talked about the top 2 sections of the exec summary and the key areas of expertise, key skills, bullet points. Then you'll see this area which we've called career highlights, 3 examples. You'll see the middle one, number 2 bullet point of the career highlights is the one that we just talked about, enterprise rent-a-car. And the reason I said I'd explain why we tend to pick 3 examples, and as I scroll down just a little bit further, so you'll see the top of Matt's CV disappear off your screen because it's less relevant now. And now you can see the whole, or the remainder of page 1 of Matt's CV. And hopefully it'll become clear that 3 career highlights is the magic number, because it allows you still to get on page 1, and it's really important this, who you're most recently or have currently been working with. And that is really important. A lot of people will expect to see that on page 1. They will not want to flip over a page to find out where you currently are or where you have most recently been. That's just one of those quirky things that we found out through looking at this time over time after time. If you leave that to page 2, you run a really big risk of losing people's interest. I know it's bizarre for the turn of the page, but it's just the way it is. So don't go on too far with the consequence of not being able to get your most recent or current job on page 1 of the CV. The only exception to that is out-and-out contractors. As I say, there are different rules for them, for which I'm more than happy to deal with at a separate occasion. But for most people, this format and style of CV is the one that tends to work really well, and one of the golden rules is making sure that that current or most recent job is at the bottom of page 1. So 3 career highlights. It's also enough. If you can imagine putting, I don't know, 15 career highlights, and then suddenly they don't become highlights, they become a monstrosity, and people will lose their will and they won't want to read them. 3's just a nice balance. It normally allows most people to get across the message they want to get across, which is, I've just told you that I'm good at this, I'm in this particular space, I've got areas of expertise that I want to bring to your attention, and here's the proof. And if you do that well, you get a much better result. And then, as I say, we go on to talk, as you can see at the base of page 1 of Matt's CV, we're finally now going to be talking about career history. And we're sort of on a downhill stretch now, because the bulk of what I wanted to get across this evening is what you see on the screen now. First page, or the first 80% of page 1 is the absolute critical piece of information. Get that right, and many people have gotten interviews without anybody going on beyond page 1. it can make that much of a difference, because people just instantaneously think, yeah, this is the right kind of person in the right kind of space with some proof to back up what they're saying. Hallelujah. Let's get on the phone, find out a bit more, arrange an interview or some other progression. It does the trick. Okay, let's get back to talk a little bit about how we pull together the career history, because there's some important things here as well. What's critical here is the structure of the document. Most people, not everybody, strangely, but most people tend to get this bit right, fortunately, because it is logical. It's almost part of sort of CV folklore, and that is you start with your most recent or current job and work backwards in reverse chronological order. We still see a few CVs who start, for people who started work in the 1980s, and on page one is their first job, which they started in 1982. I mean, most people will just reject that straight away. It's wholly irrelevant. So if you are doing that, if you're starting with your first job and then moving onwards, and by page 5 you get to find out what you're actually doing now, do never apply for another job with that kind of CV. Sort that out straight away, unless for some bizarre reason you're getting lots of interviews, which is the acid test, as you'll remember. But so most people get it the right way around. Start with the most recent and work backwards, and as I mentioned earlier, start on page 1. Make sure that current or most recent job is on page 1. Now, what a lot of people don't do is actually describe who on earth they work for. They assume, again, I mentioned earlier, people assume a lot of things. One of the things a lot of folk assume is that by mentioning their employer, the reader of the CV will magically know who on earth that business is and what they're about. Most people don't work for a Virgin or a Rolls-Royce or a Maserati or a Ferrari or a British Airways, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which way you look at it. And even if you did work for one of those companies, they often have lots of different divisions. And so, for example, Rolls-Royce, if you say, oh yeah, I work for Rolls-Royce, well, which bit is it? Is it the car bit, Goodwood, Sussex, or is it the aero engine bit in Derby or some other place? Is it UK-based? Is it international? There's so many other subdivisions and bits and pieces that most people would want to know about. But most people don't tend to put any of that on their CV. They imagine that somebody will magically know all of that, and they don't. And guess what? If you don't know something, you tend to make the wrong decision or a bad decision, and that might impact on you. So take the time, provide just a brief, and I'll show you again an example shortly, a brief indicator about who on earth your employer is and what they do, the size of them, maybe number of employees, turnover, stuff like that. Also, provide a brief summary of the role. Most people, again, tend to go with the job description, and they assume that the reader of the CV will know what that means. Some job descriptions mean different things to different people. So don't assume anything. Provide a brief example or summary of what you get up to and what responsibilities you have. What's the structure of the team that you fit into? Who do you report into? Do you have any people reporting into you? What's your peer group like? That kind of stuff's actually really interesting and relevant, and it gives your target audience some kind of measure of whether you'd fit well within their business or not. And it's all going to come out in the wash. If it's important to the reader of your CV, whether you mention it or not, they'll want to find it out. So if you're not impressed with who you work for, or you think it won't help your cause, that ain't going to change. You might get an interview, and somebody might then flush it out of you and then decide that you're not the right person for the job, so just waste a whole lot of time. So you can't change the fact they are what they are. So take the time to mention them and get the decision made for the best of reasons earlier on in the process. Really important to talk about a little bit about how you're measured. Most people, again, they're either scared, afraid, or choose to think that it's not relevant to mention how they're measured. And I'm afraid it isn't. In particular roles, particularly sales, business development, contract winning, project management, most people want to know that kind of information. You do need to put a bit, and I emphasize a bit, about what your duties and responsibilities are. Again, most people, when I keep saying most, and I'm talking about 2/3 to 75% typically of folk, will write a CV, and it almost looks like they've copied and pasted their job description. That is the wrong approach. Most people have a job which is shared by lots of other people up and down the country in competitor companies. And guess what? Most people performing a similar kind of job have a similar kind of job description. So guess what? If you're a recruiter and you've looked at 50 applicants, and they've all presented in effect a CV that's just a list. It's not got really any evidence to back up what the person's claiming, and then when they get to the bit about the job, it just looks like the same as everybody else. That is really demoralising, but worse still, it makes it really hard to decide who to interview. So you need a bit about what your duties and responsibilities are, but you need to focus much more on what you actually did with those duties and responsibilities, and that means loading your CV more with achievements. There is a bit of a ratio lurking there, which I won't go into right now, but you need to get a balance. And most people fall down on the latter. They don't get the achievements right. In fact, some cases they don't mention any of their achievements. And that's a way of differentiating. So it's what you did with those duties and responsibilities that's important, not the things that you were expected to do as part of your job, because they will be shared by lots of other people. It can be appropriate, depending on who you are, what you've been doing, where you've been working, to mention why you left each position. Some people do that, and it's not that that's wrong, but just think about the message it's sending if you are doing it. So if you've been made redundant lots of times and you're not explaining the context, and it's not immediately obvious as to why you were made redundant, so for example, if you work for Woolworths and you were made redundant in whenever that business went under, 2008 or whenever it was, then most people would say, yeah, okay, everybody was made redundant. Or if you're unfortunate to be in Blockbuster recently, working for them, most people would know right now that everybody suffered as a consequence. But if you don't mention that context, or it's not immediately apparent, and all you've got is a list of jobs from which you were made redundant, it doesn't really send a positive message, whatever the reasons. And there may be very good reasons and nothing to do with you or your performance, but I guarantee most people will see it as being individual failure or something wrong with the individual. They won't see the bigger picture. If you've been promoted, that's a good reason to mention. If you've been headhunted or selected by a previous boss who then moved on to another company and pulled you out of the business because you're a good operator, that's a good reason. If you'd hit somebody and you'd been charged with gross misconduct, I don't think I've never seen anybody put that, but I've seen some people put pretty close to that unbelievably on their CV. It's just a no-no. So only select and mention those reasons if they're positive. You'd hope that goes without saying, but you would be surprised. I said I'd give you some examples. So imagine, again, we're talking about this finance guy, I would imagine. So we're saying this finance director that we talked about earlier, and we provided some examples of what he was good at. Let's imagine that he was working for a business. So the first thing under the sort of dates and job title that he had was that he's just describing it a little bit. He's saying, you know, whatever role I had, it was a dual role, looking after finance and IT. The business was whatever size it was. It employed a certain number of people, and I was part of the board. Okay, that's all you need to do. So when I've said description of employer, summary of role, that's the kind of thing you want to be talking about. It's not too much information. It's enough to set the scene. People then can understand what you're used to. Then there's a little bit more. So there's sort of structure of the team bit, KPIs, into that maybe here, certainly in a bit in the next comment. So X number of staff, X number of reports, what functions those reports had, and sort of a broad indicator of some of the responsibilities on the shoulder of this individual. Again, very simple, should be dead easy to compile, makes it easy for the reader to understand how you fit into the world. And sorry, here are the KPI bits. So this is what this person was judged on. Later on in the CV, the achievements bit could be some commentary on whether any of these things were hit. Again, at this level of role, whether you mention them on the CV or not, somebody's going to want to know it at some point in the interview process. So we'd go on to explain that in a later part of the CV. But it just gives you a flavour for how to introduce each of the positions on your CV that are meaningful and relevant. So hopefully that gives you a reasonably strong idea. It isn't a lot of work. It should be known to you. You should have access to this information pretty quickly. It's not for every single role. If you've done, I don't know, 10 jobs, you wouldn't want to do this 10 times. And I'll come on to what you would do shortly. but it's really for the most important roles, the most recent roles, that you want to go into this level of detail. Okay, quick, well, I call it popcorn break for you, not for me. A lot of people tend to ask at the end of the session, what on earth do we do? And so I'll briefly explain that before going back to the CV and showing you how it all hangs together, and then dealing with some of the final bits like personal details, education, qualifications, and then talking about LinkedIn, of course, which I'll just briefly talk about. So for those people that are interested in what we get up to, it won't surprise you that we write CVs for people, and that we know that they can significantly increase the chances of people getting interviews. So you probably would have gathered that. If you're interested in that kind of service, the way it works is that we match our clients up with one of our team, all of operated at pretty senior level. We hold a telephone session with people, or Skype, or whatever it needs to be, pretty much any time of the day or week, and we go through a process that allows us to get all the raw data that we've just been talking about. So if you're not really clear on what your value proposition to the world is, which career highlights you should pick, what are the key skills that you should be mentioning, what are the hot skills in your marketplace, we can get that out of people in the nicest possible way. And then we use all of that information to build your business case. So we can gather all the raw data, figure out what's important and what isn't, thrash it through with you as an individual, and then present a document that effectively becomes your CV, or as we like to call it, the business case as to why somebody should hire you. And that's done from scratch. So we're not in the business of modifying or tweaking people's CVs. That's actually virtually impossible to do. People will offer to charge you money for that kind of thing, and they'll say, oh, give us your CV and we'll sort of tart it up a bit and send it back to you. It makes no difference. Most of the business we get from people who've already been down that road. So it's wholly pointless. The acid test, as I said earlier, if your CV is currently working and getting you the 7, 8, 9, 10 interviews out of 10, don't worry about any of this. Your CV is doing yourself proud. It's not something that we're going to be able to magically make massively better for you. There's no point. If, however, you're not getting any interviews, or in the 1, 2, 3, arguably 4, 5 out of 10 level, we can materially improve that. And so could anybody else who could properly write a CV, actually, it's safe to say. So we know we can do it, but anybody who sat down and actually approached this professionally could sort it and make a difference. And bottom line is, of course, you become more desirable to employers. So it's not as if it's overly clever or there's some kind of magic going on. It's just saying, okay, if you've ever bought a product or service, a house, a car, a washing machine, a domestic product, you won't have just bought it, or very rarely will you have just bought it with any thought. You'll have gone through a process, and the process will have been to absorb information either flung at you from marketing campaigns, advertisements, internet, word of mouth, and then you'll have made a decision on which product or service to buy. And it's just like that in the employment market. You've got a lot of people out there who are seeking jobs, you've got employers who are offering jobs, and they will look at the marketplace and they'll make a decision based on who they think would be best to look at for that job. All we're suggesting is you make that a bit easier for them. You make your proposition much stronger by considering their needs more, and not just sending a CV and hoping that it will work, because you can't really be bothered with it. The market's just evolved way beyond that, and you need to fine-tune it. Now, enough of that, but if you stick around to the end, which we're shortly at, then we've got a special offer, which we always offer our webinar customers and delegates, which will save a whole heap of money on what we actually do. So more of that later. So far on the CV, we've talked about everything that builds a business case, and we've just started getting into the where are you working now, or where have you most recently worked. There is a point at which you need to draw a line, particularly if you've got a career longer than 7 to 10 years. And that line is around about that either kind of time period, probably no more than 10 years, or if you've had quite a few jobs in that 10 years, around about the fourth most recent jobs. And beyond that, to be honest, nobody's going to be that interested in what you've been up to. You might think that, but I promise that it's not wholly important, with very few exceptions. You'll be judged on what you've done most recently and over the last 7, 8 to 10 years, roughly. It does vary a little bit, but anything sort of in the 11 to 15 to 20 years ago will have no bearing on whether you get an interview or not. So your CV is the tool that gets you the interview. It's not chapter and verse on your life. So don't bother spending huge amounts of time describing what went on more than 10 years ago, because nobody will be interested to get you the interview. People might be interested later on in the process, but to get you the interview, you need to focus on what you've got to offer right now. So what do we do with the early career then for those people that have got careers stretching back more than 10 years? Well, we don't provide anywhere near the level of detail I just talked about with the career history bit, so there's no need to go into the detail about the structure, the nature of the role. We would just reduce everything to literally a line. So from what date till what date did you work for such an employer, and what job title did you hold? That's it. End of. No more explanation needed. It's not relevant. If people do want to know, they'll ask you at a later stage, but it will have no material bearing on whether you get an interview or not. For contractors or interim workers, you need, our recommendation would be, you need to provide a reasonably detailed, comprehensive list of all the things that you have done, because that's part of your stock in trade. But as I say, if you're in that space, we probably need to have a one-to-one conversation, because there's some other things you need to take into account. But for most permanent employees or contractors who only recently got into contracting and previously had a permanent career, then, as I say, in detail, you provide the most recent role, and then anything that went on 7 to 10 years earlier than that. But beyond that period of time, minimise it to just a line. And I'll show you an example shortly when we look at that CV. Interestingly, down the bottom, I made a comment, more and more people tend to have something done to their CV to improve their chances, and the recent current economic climate has influenced that to some degree, because everybody wants to get a bit of an edge. So imagine that you're going to be up against more and more people who are going down the route of getting somebody to sort their CV out. So if you think, oh dear, all these things that this guy said to me tonight, my CV's not in a great state, then be wary of that. That will start to influence your chances, and it will make a difference. So if that helps with your stats about whether you're getting interviews or not, make a decision on to do something or not, make that decision at least. At the very least, do something. Let's take a look at Matt's CV again, just before we move on to some of the other bits and pieces detail-wise. So I'm scrolling now to appear on your screen shortly. This is the bottom of page 2 of Matt's CV and the start at the top of page 3, him having a 3-page CV, which is probably where it ought to be lengthwise. For any of those people out there who have thought, well, how long should a CV be? Bit of an old wives' tale in terms of should it be a preset number. Unless you're specifically asked by anybody to provide it on a page, 2 pages, 3 pages, or whatever, then there is no real strict rule of thumb. If you're sending a good CV to somebody, they won't mind how long it is within reason, but most of the ones we write are probably 3 pages. Some 4, some 2, but most 3. And there is no evidence to prove that that is right or wrong. It's certainly not wrong. What is most important is the content, and that's what most employers will actually feed back to you if you were to get a proper answer. As regards to Matt's CV, you'll see that we've provided detail. His CV is a bit old, so we've sort of slightly gone over the timeline because his CV was constructed some time ago. But you can see just at the top of the screen there's his experience at Hayes when he was a senior manager. And then once we've described what he was doing at Hayes, we've drawn a line, and his earlier career, which is on the top part of page 3, towards the bottom of your screen, you'll see the box headed earlier career. And that's just an example of how we abbreviate things that he did that are so long ago that nobody's that interested. And that sounds a bit harsh, and it's not to denigrate what you've been up to, but honestly, people just aren't interested. It's not going to make any difference as to whether they interview you, what you did in 1999 or earlier than that, or even in the early noughties And interestingly, you'll notice in Matt's case, from 95 to 99, he was at Enterprise Rent-A-Car. You remember that career highlight was Enterprise Rent-A-Car, one of the 3 career highlights that we provided. And that just proves the point, really, about relevance. There's nothing to stop you drawing on experience from many years ago if it's still relevant and appropriate to your target audience. And Matt's case is a good point in case. So we've not provided any detail about what happened at Enterprise Rent-A-Car and how it fit in, but we have chosen to feature something that happened there because it's still relevant to what Matt has to offer the world. And that applies equally to any of you out there. If you've got something that was really important and is still relevant, doesn't matter when it happened, could be in the 70s, the 80s, 90s, it doesn't matter. If it's still relevant, it can still be mentioned as a career highlight. Those things don't have to be things that you did yesterday. And so you see his earlier career we've just abbreviated, and that's how it should be treated, because, as I said, it does make no material difference to what you have to offer the world. Okay, very quickly, before we move on to LinkedIn, some of the other things that you obviously do need to have on your CV and how to treat them. Education, professional qualifications, professional development, be that training courses. Yes, of course, you need to put them on your CV, but you don't need to put where you did O-levels if you've done a degree. And so we tend to put the highest level of education and nothing below that unless it's specifically asked for. It is important to put any professional development or qualifications that we have, but it's not important to date any of them because that gives away your age, and that may or may not be a sensitive subject. There's no obligation for you to put the dates, so we tend not to put them. So it makes the job of trying to figure out how old you are harder because that will not be important. So, yes, qualifications go in there. If you've got an MBA or a professional qualification like Prince 2 or a specific degree that's relevant to your job hunting, that could be mentioned in your opening professional summary. So we could say an MBA educated finance director with X number of years experience in your professional summary. So we could still get across the level of your ability on page 1 of the CV, but the detail of all your qualifications would fall later on in the CV, towards the end of it, because in most people's cases it isn't a differentiating thing, and if it's that big a deal, we'd find a way of mentioning it on page 1. As far as personal details are concerned, you'll remember when I opened up and talked about the CV and we saw Matt's example, it was just his name and 2 telephone numbers and then his professional summary. And I said there's a reason why we don't put the personal details, particularly things like address, at the top of the CV, where I have to say most people probably still put it. There's a number of reasons, some of them more important than others. One of the reasons is that by putting anything at the top of page 1, you're taking up valuable space that could be better used, because that is the key piece of real estate that helps people make a decision on whether they should interview you or not. It's highly unlikely that the interview will be given, as long as you're making a strong business case for yourself, to somebody purely based on location. And in fact, it might actually work against you if you live on the edge of wherever the recruiter or employer thinks you should be living. And you don't really want to lose things because somebody imagines that you've got too long a commute or they've got some kind of problem with where you live. So our argument is, yes, okay, you need to have that detail, but you don't need to lead with it. It's not the most important thing about you, so why have it at the top of page 1, which is the most important piece of the CV? So we tend to put it towards the end of the CV. Yes, we'd recommend putting the address. If you've not already put it on page 1 of the CV, we put your email address, of course. Some people don't want their home number on the CV, so we have top of page 1, underneath the name, mobile one side, email the other, or mobile and home and mobile, or home and email, or any combination of those. But whichever bit's not on the first page, we obviously balance in the personal details section. There are a few things that you need to put on the CV depending on their relevance. So I've just put a few up there. Yes, driving license, that's important, particularly for any kind of role that's mobile. Mobility if you're up for a relocation. So if you do live in, say, Cornwall and you've applied for a job in Scotland, some commentary about your ability to relocate is pretty important so that you don't get weeded out for applying for a job that's clearly nowhere near where you live. If you've got any kind of security clearance, languages, or particular eligibility to work in certain environments or indeed certain countries, that all needs to be reinforced within this section so people don't assume anything. And then just finally, a few general comments, some more important than others. Probably the most important one there is the spelling. You'd be surprised how many people still go to market with spelling mistakes on their CV. In the current climate, that's almost instant rejection. Again, you might argue, well, if you're the right person for the job, why should you be rejected for a spelling mistake? But if it's going through a recruiter, it's so easy for the recruiter to say to their client, we rejected this person because they made a spelling mistake, and very few clients would argue with them. But you'd be surprised how many people still come through with spelling or grammatical errors. There are certain ways of writing the CV which you might have gathered if you took a look at Matt's example in any detail. I won't go into that right now. Suffice to say, it's important that you don't write as if you're not describing yourself as I or by your name. So some people say, if your name's Ian, Ian has done this, Ian has done that. It's not good. I have done this, I have done that. That's not good. Write in third person. And the formatting's subjective, of course, but as you'll have seen from Matt's example, it's just clear and concise. That's all you need to do. Don't get hung up about certain fonts or styles of layout. Trust the judgment of, if you know somebody who's done something and it works, or our judgment, because we know what works, then go with that. Don't get hung up about certain fonts and styles and ways of laying out CV. Simple is best. And one thing that's linked to LinkedIn, on the CVs these days, we tend to recommend people put some testimonial evidence. We call it recommendations because LinkedIn now calls it recommendations. I'll talk about LinkedIn very shortly, but often people have on LinkedIn recommendations. If they're good, relevant recommendations, then I would be recommending that you ported them across onto your CV, maybe just 2 or 3. A good recommendation is something from a boss, line manager, founder, owner of the business, whatever, somebody who's engaged your services and can comment on them. A bad recommendation is from a mate or colleague or somebody out of your peer group, and it just appears to be a bit of a slap on the back and a sort of reciprocal, I'll recommend you, you recommend me. But if you've got any good recommendations that test your abilities, put them on the CV. They can be really effective. And they're much more effective than the horrible cliche that a lot of people put on their CV, which is references available on the press. If you've done that, remove that this evening, tomorrow morning. It means nothing. It's taking up valuable space. It's a useless statement. And if people want to take up references, they will. Whether you've allowed that or not, they will seek them. So find some proper recommendations, some testimonial evidence, and use that on your CV. Again, I'll show you an example very shortly. In fact, I'll show you an example right now on Matt's CV. So again, just refreshing your screen, but this is the base of page 3 of Matt's CV. You'll just see a couple of recommendations there. So we're assuming they're from people that are relevant and appropriate, but they're just comments. People saying, yeah, I've used Matt's services, he's as good as it says on the tin, kind of a comment, and so adds value. That's the important message. Okay, LinkedIn, very briefly. You'll remember earlier I said that 92%, I think it was, of recruiters or hiring managers will use the CV as the means to judge who to interview, and explained why that was important, and not as obvious as it may seem, or the importance being that you need to get that CV sorted and right, otherwise how else is the recruiter or hiring manager going to make a decision? Of that 92%, the vast majority, over 80%, will check you out on LinkedIn as well before inviting you for interview. So guess what? If your CV is not so good, but you've somehow managed to get somebody's attention, and they then go and look on LinkedIn, you still stand a chance of losing things if your LinkedIn profile differs in any way from your CV or is worse, in inverted commas, than your CV. And so the base message here is it's increasingly important to make sure that if you've got a LinkedIn profile, and for anybody in a commercial environment, I'd recommend you have a LinkedIn profile because it's so powerful now in terms of getting you visibility, that you treat your LinkedIn profile properly. Most people, again, it's around that 2/3 to 75%, have an ineffective profile because they've either just ported over a bad CV, or they've dabbled in LinkedIn and never really given it the time and attention it deserves, and not really realised how many people are now looking at it and using it as a judgment before they even speak with you. So very quickly, the things to take a look at are the professional headline. So the bit that's under your name is called the professional headline, and it allows you a certain number of characters to explain a bit about you. Don't put in there things like looking for a job, seeking a job, or your current job title, which actually LinkedIn bizarrely encourages you to do by default. That's not that helpful. What you need to be describing is what you are. Going back to our professional summary, what you are, what's your value proposition. It needs to be an abridged version of that. The summary, which is the text immediately underneath your name and professional headline and photo if you have one, that sort of box there, needs to be equally powerful. It needs to be building the business case as to why someone should hire you. It ought not to be a rambling prose on how wonderful you are, or just a copy verbatim of your CV. If you're going to talk about the jobs that you've done, and most people do, don't go into huge amounts of detail. Just provide a brief summary. Reason for that is you want people to be, hopefully, interested in you enough to want to find out more. If you give them everything there is to know about you, they might make a decision without actually having seen you, and if that's a no decision, that's not to your advantage. Most people don't use the project section of LinkedIn, and some people have been on LinkedIn and don't even know what project is, but it's a great area for porting across the career highlights that I spent some time talking about. So if you're interested in that, that's something maybe for another discussion, or if you're using our services, we'll populate for you. But it's a really good area for providing evidence to back up the claims you've made about yourself. And don't be afraid to play around with the ordering of the sections within LinkedIn. It's all drag and drop. Again, some people don't realise that, and they just go with the default setting, and it doesn't actually work its best for people. You can reorder all the sections by drag and dropping them, and there's a way that presents the business case with more strength than the default settings. So we would encourage sorting that out. But the bottom line is, more and more employers and recruiters use LinkedIn to find people. So our recommendation is be on it well, and then you don't have to be a manic LinkedIn user, but just make sure you're representing your interests well and building your business case on LinkedIn just as you are on your CV, because lots of people will start to look at you before seeing anything else about you on LinkedIn, and it's only going one way, which is more and more use of LinkedIn. It's a really valuable tool, whether you like it or not. Okay, finally, I promised some discounts for those people who hung in there. This is only relevant for people who've obviously decided that they need some help. Bottom line is to write a CV, what we call our professional CV, so that's that over the phone or Skype interview, the analysis of all the things that you've got to offer the world, rebuilding your CV, and giving you something to go to market with, and sorting your LinkedIn profile. So if you don't have one, we'll build it for you. If you have one, we'll rewrite it and restructure it for you, and provide a cover letter. All those three things would normally cost $379 plus VAT, so not an inconsiderable amount of money. You can buy them separately. In fairness, the CV is normally $299 plus VAT, LinkedIn profile is 50 quid plus VAT, cover letter 30 quid plus VAT. For the webinar attendees, we do a really special offer, which is to do all three of those things for $275 plus VAT. So that's less than the cost of the CV ordinarily is for our website customers. So you save a not inconsiderable amount of money. There is a catch, and that is that if you're interested in that, you've got to order by close of play Monday the 13th, that's next Monday. And if you're interested in that, you need to go visit that domain and link that I just put on the screen. Now you can't do anything with that on screen, so what I'm going to do is just paste into the question box the same link, so if anybody wants to copy and paste that and visit it later, then that's what you need to do to take advantage of that offer. As I say, it is strictly available till Monday the 13th, close of play. If you want to talk about the service, by all means contact us and we'll help you and make a decision, and then you can decide whether it's the right way to go. You've got some time to do that, of course. But if you fancy having a go yourself, you don't want to spend that kind of money on your CV, there's another pack using the same link, the same website link. You can buy yourself a pack with some templates, a workbook, and then a really useful interview ebook for just 15 quid plus VAT. So it's almost a no-brainer if you want to get a bit of advice and have a go yourself. If you subsequently decide that you still need our help, we'll give you your money back on that if you subsequently order one of our services. So it's a really good toe in the water. And ultimately, you can email us, visit the website, give us a call, or email us at that email address with any queries, and we will help as best we can. So that is the end of that for this evening. Thank you very much for your attention. It's an awful lot of information, but to be honest, there's no easy way around it. The CV is a complicated beast. To get it done properly takes a bit of time and effort. Hopefully I've given you an indication of the time and effort required, and the key things and the key messages are: you've got to build a business case on your CV and view yourself as a service or a product to your target audience. And you've got to know what that target audience is looking for. You've got to understand what you've got to offer from your sort of toolkit of skills and abilities and how to present that to the target audience. And you've got to make sure your LinkedIn profile, if you've got one, and if you haven't got one, probably get one is the first thing, but then make sure your LinkedIn profile reflects that business case. But almost above and beyond all is, if you're going to market looking for anything, just keep an eye on those stats. If you're getting interviews to a satisfactory level, all is well with the world. If you're not, do something, and then the choice is, do you fix it yourself, or do you get somebody to help you? And if you get somebody to help you, we can help you with that, using the services that we just described. So hopefully that set the scene that at least allows you to progress. Now, I promised I'd answer any questions, so I'll just take a look and see if anybody's asked any, and you're more than welcome to hang on and listen to any answers. I'll go through them in as best I can in order, if there are any, and there are quite a few. So I'll start as best I can with these and just go on until either everybody signs off or I lose the will and expire. But again, as I said, if anybody needs to shoot off now who doesn't want to listen to the answers, we are done. I've said my piece, and I wish you a very happy new year, and if we can help, we're here to help. For those who want to hang on and listen to the answers to the questions, I'll just go through them one by one now. Okay, so let's have a look. With my varied role, this is Charlie, if you're still on, do I need to list, with my varied job role, do I need to list out every little detail on my CV? And will it give me a better chance of getting an interview? Not necessarily, Charlie, no. As hopefully you've gathered by now, you've got to build yourself a business case. Keep going on about it, but that means your target audience, whoever you're sending your CV to, will have a certain level of expectation. They'll have some things that they view as essential and some things that are desirable from a candidate. And your CV's got to pretty much hit all the essentials on the head and some of the desirables for you to get an interview. So, although it's a bit of a cop-out, we probably need to know a little bit more about what you've been up to and what you're targeting. But the key to it is just making sure you align both of those things. So a lot of people think the more I mention, the better it will be. And that's not the case. There is a danger if you appear to be, and I hope you understand the phrase, I'm not sure whether you're UK-based or not, but if you've ever heard the phrase, jack of all trades, master of none, that applies a lot in CV writing. If you go to market trying to cover all the bases, you're likely to be less successful than appearing to be a specialist. So often specialists win versus generalists, with a few exceptions. So our job normally is, when we're working with clients who've got very varied or broad roles, is to try and narrow them a bit and say, okay, look, whatever you think about that, try and focus on what's important to your target audience. And if that appears to be a much narrower focus, go with that, reflect that on your CV, you'll stand a better chance of success. I hope that answers that. Will there be any notes we can download at the end? Yeah, Robert, great question. I should have mentioned at the beginning, so slap wrist. All of you will be sent a link tomorrow morning to a recording of this very webinar, and you can then watch it again. And if you need any advice or guidance, just contact us directly via the website, and I will help. Somebody will help. Rayan, where is Matt? Matt's. If you know Matt and you're expecting to be on this evening, then all I can do is apologise because I'm not Matt. If you've now realised that and be satisfied with what I've been able to convey to you this evening, then I'll just accept that's all okay. Andrew, are other social networking sites like Facebook and Google Plus important for job hunting as well? Oh, that's a really good question. The answer is yes, to a degree, but based on the evidence that we've got, and well, I can't protest we have everything and insight into all these things. There are certain employers and certain types of job that Facebook and Google Plus would be really well suited for, and it would be applicable. I think most of the clients we deal with tend to be middle to senior management broadly, a few administrative functions as well, but most of the jobs they're going for tend to be via normal, if I use the word normal, job boards or employers. And Facebook and Google Plus are used as supplementary means of gathering candidates or interest in a business. And so they're useful to find out about jobs, but they'd be rarely the exclusive source. If you're in any kind of commercial mainstream role, LinkedIn is by far and away the most important. But what I would say is that plenty of employers will search Facebook and Google and all these other sites to see if you've got a track record of being some kind of quasi-lunatic or sensible person. So our message to people is be very careful about what you post on these places, because people will find you out, and there's some very nifty tools for doing exactly that. But as far as the actual presence on them as a candidate, I'd say two key things: have a good CV and a good LinkedIn profile. I hope that answers the question. Will there be any follow-on benefits for CV proofing as part of Webrecruit participants? Winford, hopefully you've seen now that there's a big benefit as being Webrecruit. Mary, yes, muted by the organiser because it's one-way audio conference. Thelma, hi, it appears these days that having a LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook profile seems important to companies. Can a person's CV be jeopardised if they are not a member of a social network site? Really good question. And where should such information go on a CV? Right, yeah, good point. Our recommendation again, Thelma, if you're still there, is that on your CV, it's worth mentioning your LinkedIn profile. I wouldn't bother mentioning your Twitter or Facebook profile unless you're applying to such an internet-savvy company that it's obvious that they would expect to see that. The balance at the moment is far towards LinkedIn. It's a professional, commercial, social networking site. Crudely, and this isn't, I don't quite mean it as bluntly, but Twitter and Facebook are more social, genuinely social, and therefore it's almost like that's your own business kind of thing. The downside, of course, is what you do is often quite visible to others, and so you need to be careful on what you do on them, as I previously said. So I'd say your CV is not going to be jeopardised if you're not a member of a social network site at all. There's no evidence to support that at all. In fact, there's some evidence to suggest that if you keep a clean sheet, with the possible exception of LinkedIn, you're actually doing yourself more good than anything else, because nobody can find out any stuff about you. LinkedIn's slightly different. LinkedIn, people would expect you to be there if you're in a commercial or semi-professional role. It's hard to draw the line precisely over this webinar line, but hopefully you get that message. LinkedIn is important. The others I wouldn't worry about, and you don't need to mention Twitter and Facebook on your CV, and you won't be harshly judged for not doing that. Sadiq, what happens when an internal recruiter asks for your CV without an advertised job description? I'm not really sure what you mean by that, but let me just think about that. What happens when an internal recruiter asks for your CV without an advertised job description? Okay, well, I mean, in theory, any number of things could happen. I mean, we know all sorts of weird things go on out there. So it could be genuine and somebody's really interested in what you've got to offer. It could be that they're speculatively interested in what you've got to offer and then go to talk to a whole load of employers that might be interested in you. So it's a bit outside the realms of what we do. I'd say if you've got a good CV, well written, within reason, it doesn't matter who it goes to because it's always going to do a good job for you. But it's just a judgment thing on your part. If you want to send it to an internal recruiter and there's no job description, why do they want to see it? You just hope they're not going to waste their time. There must be a reason for it, and take a judgment call on it. I'm sorry I can't be more help, but it's sort of a bit outside of our normal scope. Valerie, that's left. What's the best? Although a question is relevant. What's the best practice? Say I or talk at the third person. I dealt with that right at the end, so Valerie may have left before then. But hopefully you heard third person. Do not say I, and do not refer yourself in the first person. Is it necessary to write very professional CV to get a position as a bookkeeper or account assistant, not very high position as a director? Olga, that's a really good question. The answer, I mean, you'd probably expect the answer to be yes. But genuinely, there are so many people out there looking for jobs. And for bookkeeping and accountant roles, you'll get, in some cases, hundreds of people applying for them. So it is really important that you go to market with a good CV. The word professional, I suppose, it's a little bit of a difficult one, really. Don't see it as being linked to the level of a person. In fact, it applies at every single level, even graduates. We do a lot of work with graduates because it's such a competitive marketplace. In the UK, 25%, I think, of graduates are unemployed, looking for work. So you can imagine how fierce the competition is. So everybody benefits from a well-written CV. It doesn't matter what level you're at. Valerie left but mentioned another good point. Heard of CAR, challenge, action, result. Same thing as STAR? Yes, broadly, yes. It's any way of compartmentalizing complex things into a logical sequence or order. So CAR, STAR, or any other similar thing works well. Sarah, what's the best way to present a period of travel abroad due to non-compete period? Okay. Again, without knowing the details, Sarah, honesty is generally the best policy within reason. There are ways of structuring the CV where you can sort of delay the inevitable, and that sounds more negative than it might actually be. I don't mean it to be so, but I guess that our advice is normally mention it, but we just need to know a little bit more detail so that you can mention it in the right context. But it sounds, if you're genuinely non-compete period, that's a very justifiable reason. No problem with that. People would understand that and respect it. Don't be afraid of it, in other words. Winford, is shading the areas relevant or just for today's purpose only? That's a really good question, Winford. No, it is the way we write our CVs. To be absolutely truthful, some people hate it. And it's such a subjective area. Some people get really wound up about fonts, and we say, look, get a life. I'm afraid. If people really hate the shading, we remove it. But there is a reason for it, and the reason is that like most websites or printed material, if you ever read them, the way areas are compartmentalized, highlighted, structured to draw the eye to is deliberate. You'll have noticed also possibly that the margins were very large on the CV that I showed you this evening, deliberately so. Partly, still people print these things out and like to write on them, so why let them write all over your hard-won content? So give them plenty of white space to scribble biro on. But mainly because if you look at most websites and you've got a wide screen on your computer, the website doesn't expand across full left to right. There's often a lot of dead space left and right, and the content, the valuable content's right in the middle or centered. And that's deliberate, and we're sort of reflecting that because that's how people like to absorb information. If you try and write the same content and stretch it to the extremes of the left and right hand margin of a CV or any other document, it's much harder to read. And the shading's just to sort of reinforce the segmentation. But it's not the be-all, and I couldn't hand on heart say to you, you won't get interviews because you've not shaded your CV. but it's just another part of the mix to make life a bit easier for the people that are reading your CV. Wayne, with regards to the career highlights, how would I put mine forward as I've just completed my degree in IT? Really good question. Most of my career involved finance. I did a complete career change. That is a really good question, and it sort of touches on graduates per se who've got no experience and people who've switched completely. And again, Wayne, without knowing the absolute detail, if you want to get into IT, then we need to draw out as much of the transferable skills and anything you've got to gather from your experience of doing the degree and present that, because you're going to be up against people who are already in the IT space, who've got the qualifications and also got some relevant experience. You've just got to accept that, yes, okay, some people's mind, you'll find it hard to compete with them, but there'll always be opportunities where people say, let's give this guy a chance, because he's actually presented a really strong argument to us. So our job there, if we were working with you, would be to get out all the raw data that said, look, this guy's got some relevant experience that could be used, or transferable skills that could be used, and position them and make the most of them. Henrik, what is your view of competency-based CVs? Well, broadly, that's really where we're heading. That's what we do. It's all about proof, whether you call it a competence-based CV or just proof. We like to think of it a little bit more subtle than that. It all goes back to building a strong business case as to why somebody should hire, which is in effect the same thing. When you're asked competency-based questions, they're really there to provide evidence of an ability or an experience or a skill. And the CVs that we write are designed to do exactly that. But obviously, without knowing what questions are being asked, we're making assumptions about what the target audience is looking for and then reflecting that on the CV. So I would be supportive of that general direction. Mukesh, how big should the summary of the role be? Same for KPIs. Hopefully you saw later on in the CV, not very big, just a couple of lines. And Mukesh, I have worked with broad responsibilities to go on and on, which is not suitable. Indeed, Mukesh, yeah, again, you might have seen, we draw a line at some point. CV, I would say, generally speaking, no more than 4 pages. If they go beyond 4 pages, you're probably getting something wrong. So there's a point at which you draw a line and say, look, you focus on a certain level of position, a certain number of positions, roughly 8 to 10 years, or 4 positions, whichever is the most relevant, and then everything else you just become much briefer on because people won't be interested in it. Jane has left. Let's just see if the question was relevant. I have had a senior position with the university, a senior lecturer, director of learning and teaching, and thinking to take a voluntary severance package, leave the university, blah, blah, blah. Okay, who comes? James, because you left because you've written a huge question there. I'll skip that now because that's such a detailed one and you're not around, so I'll go on to somebody else's. Winford, 10-point Arial font seems large now for my first page content. Well, it's the best font for CV pages. Winford, funnily enough, we use 10-point Arial font, almost certain. So I'd say that's right. No strict rule within reason. So you don't want too small. I wouldn't go any less than 10 point, and I wouldn't go any more than 12 point on most fonts. And just go with a nice clear font, not Comic Sans Serif, Arial, Times New Roman, Courier, Vidana, the one beginning with G, which I can't remember off the top of my head. Yeah, it's such a subjective area. You'll never reach a point at which everybody says, what a great font, Winford. There'll always be somebody who'll say, what have you picked that one for? But it's the content that matters within reason. Again, Winford, is there a max of career history to list? Again, depends a little bit on your circumstances, Winford. We generally say list everything, and so it just depends. If you've got a really lengthy experience, then maybe some things you need to look at. But generally speaking, the career history would say concentrate in detail 8 to 10 years or 4 jobs worth. Everything before that, just a line. But if you started work in the 1970s, for example, you know, we may need to find a way of dealing with that if that's an issue for you. But the rule of thumb is 8 to 10 years detail or 4 jobs worth. most recent 4 jobs worth. Everything else just one line, and that normally suffices. The reality is, if somebody gets to that point in the CV and is still not convinced about you, there's probably something else going wrong. Our view is, if you get them on the first page with all the relevant stuff we talked about earlier, then sort of job done. You've either got a yay or a nay. Very helpful. What's your phone number? George, if you're still on the line, our phone number is 01274 408 222. 01274 408 222, or take a look at our website, which is still on screen down the bottom of the slide. Lauren, if you're still there, should you put the URL to your LinkedIn profile on your CV? Hopefully you heard earlier I'd say yes. It's not that you have to, but we do that by default these days. So just bear with me, I'm just scrolling through questions or just comments. Marcia, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Would you please explain a bit about CV for a PhD? If that's, I say, oh God, I was going to say, if that's all you've got, and that's hideous, I didn't mean it like that. If you've done your PhD and you've not really got much experience in the work world, then it's drawing out all of the skills, transferable skills and experience you've had from dissertations, projects, assignments, and drawing on all that to make a strong business case as to why somebody should be interested in you. Obviously, from an intellectual point of view, that sounds like a good, strong part of the case, but it's then depending on the subject matter and where you're heading. So if your comment is really because you don't have much commercial experience or work experience, I wouldn't worry too much about that, because you'll be up against other people from a similar background who'll be applying for the jobs I would imagine you're interested in, and what you've really got to offer is presumably a very detailed knowledge of your subject matter and lots of work to back that up, and that's what we'd want to draw out. Can you briefly, George, can you briefly touch on the interview advice you're offering? Yeah, I will very briefly. It's really I say complicated process, George. I don't mean it quite like that. It's much more bespoke than CV writing, strangely, because it all depends on what the person's trying to do and what they're aiming for, and whether they want to trial things face-to-face or just over the telephone. You'd be surprised how much basic advice can be given over the phone that's really effective. So we do very basic packages for 60 quid, I think, where we would give you basic advice on how to deal with competency-based questions, why people are asking them, how to break them down and prepare examples to deal with those kind of questions, how to avoid waffling on and losing the point and then forgetting what the question was in the first place, all the way up, so that from that sort of basic introduction all the way up to fully blown simulated face-to-face interviews in a room where there's no kind of introduction to who on earth you are, and everybody's nice and pally about CV interview advisors. It's literally you turn up as if you're going to a proper job interview, but they are significantly expensive, I hasten to add. I mean, they're for a certain type of individual who really needs to sort out some fundamental problems. But as I say, the really effective stuff actually is quite modestly priced and really effective, and it just is an introduction on how to deal with questions and how to answer questions and how to break down complex projects into concise, brief statements. Kenneth, changed career 6 years ago and I want to change back. How do I emphasise past career? Okay, if you're still there, Kenneth, really the key thing for that normally is through the career highlights. So you'll remember if you saw Matt's CV, we drew on one career highlight that was from over 13, 14 years ago, but it was still relevant. So again, you've got to accept that you're going to be up against people who may be in that space right now doing the very job for a competitor, and they may appear on paper to be the favoured candidate. You just have to accept that. Some battles you'll win, some battles you'll lose. But if you position the CV to make sure that the reader is very quickly aware of the experience that you have in that particular space, the beauty of those career highlights is they're not time-stamped. So as you saw with Matt's example, we picked an example, the second one of 3 was from many years ago. We didn't mention the time because it's not relevant. What's important is the job you did and the result that was generated. So I suspect the same would apply to you. So you can escape from the chronological order thing, which actually would hold you back right now. So if you left it on your current CV until 6 years ago to mention the relevance of your abilities, you probably won't get anybody reading that far. But if you bring out the skills that you've got from that period of time that are still relevant now, if they are still relevant, that's how you tackle that situation. Lauren, my most recent position was actually my weakest job. Could I change the order and put an earlier job so it appears on the first page of the CV? Not really, Lauren. Again, it depends on the detail, and it's similar to what I just answered to Kenneth, really. I'd be less worried about the most recent position if you restructured the CV, not in terms of the chronological order, because people get very suspicious about that. And if they spot somebody trying to force this order, they'll normally smell a rat, and you'll come off worse as a consequence. It's a bit of a, not an exaggeration, a bit of an extrapolation situation, possibly, or an exaggeration of the fact, but that's the danger. So my recommendation would ordinarily be in those circumstances is to say, okay, forget about it being your weakest job. Let's focus on what you've got to offer. Where are the strength areas? Create the career highlights, the whole business case, the professional summary, the key skills, to draw out the strengths and then use them to lead on the CV, so that although you see it as the weakest job, by the time anybody gets there, they've already started to think very positively about you. Without knowing the detail, that would be my best recommendation. Carl, HM Forces for 22 years, contract now up. How difficult it is to transfer my skills and experiences to civilian terminology? Oh, yeah, good question. We deal with quite a lot of people who come out of the forces in all disciplines. Again, there are some people who really look for your kind of experience. So part of the issue is just targeting. I would imagine, I'd hope that the forces or the bit that you're working in might give you some guidance on the kind of recruitment people or employers to talk with in the first place, because there are some people very receptive to your background. Depends a little bit on the areas you want to go into. I mean, I'll just give you a few examples, and I hope it doesn't sound cliche to you, but I mean this in a positive sense, that if you are looking to get into security, marine protection, close protection, any of those kind of areas, of course, people with your background might be seen, if that's your background, that area of the forces, you'd be judged very positively. Still need a good CV to get the message across, because you're up against a lot of competition for obvious reasons, but that would work well. If you're in a completely different area, maybe in logistics or communications or engineering, slightly broader, because you're dealing with people who are in that from the private sector, civilian experience, and you're going to be up against them. Some people view your skills as more advantageous and attractive, others won't, bluntly. And again, you've just got to accept that. It's just the way the world is. So if you build the strongest case you can for the skills that you've got, try and strip away the reference to the forces, probably, depending on who your target audience is, concentrate on those transferable skills and how they've been used and how they might benefit somebody in Civvy Street. That would be my recommendation. That's what we tend to do for others. Many else left. Skip his for now. Demeter is left. Nessa, what is the best way to present an intentional break in employment 3 years post-layoff to stay-at-home mum parent study for a part-time master's? Okay, good question, Nessa. If you're still there, which looks like you are, then similarly to what I've said before, really, if that's gained you your master's, that's a good thing. People now do what you've done much more frequently and often than they used to do, so it's less of an issue. So I'd be honest with it. It depends when, if it's the most recent thing. So if you just coming out of that break, or you're proposing to get back into the market after having taken the break and you're currently in that break, then it's my broad recommendation would be mention it, talk about what you've been up to, explain the gap. don't leave it as being an unanswered question in the hope that people might just skim over it, because they won't. So best just be open, honest, describe what you've been up to, but focus the first part of the CV on all the other things that you've got to offer from your earlier career, assuming it's relevant to what you want to do going forwards. Manuel, I'm based in the UK. Sorry, Manuel, I missed the earlier question you might have answered, unless I've dealt with you and just forgotten about it, so I do apologise. Let me have a look. Sorry, just bear with me. Those are still on. I've got somebody enjoyed the webinar. Robert's left, but he enjoyed the webinar, so thank you, Robert. Lauren, I've been working for a marketing and PR agency which specialises in the education sector, but I would like to return to work in the IT software sector. 1.5 years experience. Should I write on my CV that I wish to return to IT sector at the top? Yes, Lauren, not so much that you want to return to it, but yeah, I suppose the intent should be to, we'd be wanting to structure that opening kind of statement that you're qualified to be doing work in that space, and I wouldn't sort of bother trying to explain that you want to get back to it. I just present the fact that you are somebody who wants to be in that space because you've got experience of it. If that makes sense. So it's not that you're ignoring it, because of course you've got to report the facts in terms of where you've been and what you've been doing, but that opening part of the CV, the first sort of 2/3 of page 1, could all be about how you are a valid applicant for IT software sector because of the experience that you have in it. And then later on, whilst you're explaining, of course, that you've been working in the PR and marketing agency, by that time, what you've got to hope is that people have absorbed the fact that you've got the skills and abilities, you've taken time to provide some career highlights where you use that 1.5 years experience to provide a handful of examples of what you've done in the IT and software sector space. So by the time they've read all that and absorbed it, that's what they're thinking in their mind. If you try and explain, I'm currently in marketing and PR, but I'd like to get back to IT, there's a lot of evidence to say that a lot of people just switch off right then. They'll just say, marketing and PR, not relevant, move on. So I'd be more bold with the I'm justifiably a valid applicant because of my experience, and then leave the what you've been up to most recently until later on in the CV. Christos, if you have only one milestone in your career, not 3, is it fine or not? Yeah, that's a really good question, Christos. Yes, if you've only got one thing you feel is a career highlight, if genuinely there's only one thing you can think of that would be relevant, there's no harm in having just the one. We'll probably restructure the CV slightly. I would be surprised, hand on heart, if that's all you've got. I suspect there's probably other stuff lurking there, and it just needs extracting from you in the nicest possible way. I'd not be too hard on yourself, Christos. I'd be willing to bet a pint that there's something else lurking there, and we could make something of it. So if you're prepared to accept that challenge, but an unequal bet actually, so send us 270 quid plus VAT and I'll buy you a pint if we can't find more than 2 career highlights out of you. So I'll leave you to make that decision. Angela, fantastic link will be sent out for all attendees. Yes. Yeah, so yeah, you'll get a link to this again, and again, I hasten to add, any questions, just contact us on a one-to-one basis. Winford, just a chicken and egg situation, being unemployed on journeys, okay, any options? Not just unemployed, taking over. Winford, what might be, actually, Winford, if you're still on, probably what's best, using the email that's still on the screen, the info@cvandinterviewadvisors.co.uk, just scribble that down, send me your CV, just with a brief explanation of your circumstances, and I'll take a look at things. Thank you, Thelma, for the thank you. Lauren, oh right, Lauren again. I worked for a company for 6 months, then I was headhunted by another company. Should I put this on my CV, or will it seem like I'll leave a job new quickly if I get a better offer? It's a real fine line, that, Lauren. the reality is, I think it probably is good to mention it, because the reality is any decent recruiter or employer will look at that, and if you don't explain it, they'll probably imagine the same thing or worse. So it probably is worth explaining, and maybe if honestly you could suggest that it wasn't just for the money. If it was just for the money, I understand why that would be, and it's not a bad thing necessarily, but of course it probably wouldn't be the best thing to say. So yeah, I'd recommend probably mentioning it, and if we were finding out a bit more about the background, we might be able to provide a bit more advice specifically. But I'd say yeah, it's probably worth mentioning the headhunt bit, because otherwise people will think the worst anyway. Arturo, how to tailor CV to the job specification? Again, good question. It's really hard sometimes, in fairness. Most people who've applied for jobs will know that sometimes you get a really good detailed brief, but it's rare. Often you'll get a scanty description about something and you really wonder whether it's worth applying. So it can be difficult. Part of our role when we're writing people's CVs is to imagine generically. Most people say, look, this is what I'm aiming for generally. And sometimes we'll look at a specific application, and even with lots of knowledge about the types of jobs, you can't always get it right. So you've got to take a bit of an educated guess and just say, okay, if you're Arto, I don't know what you are. Let's say you're a I don't know, computer salesperson, for want of a better example. So pretty much most computer salespeople will have a similar kind of expectation upon their shoulders. So we'd write a CV and recommend that you would write a CV that broadly fit that. Now we know broadly what that job spec is going to be. If you don't, we can help with that kind of thing. If you do, or you can find some other job that's similar, at least it gives you a bit of a steer. And then you just got to accept sometimes you're going to get nearer the mark than other times. And that's not your fault. That's the fault of the employer or recruiter for putting together a miserable job advert. And yeah, you just can't help that, I'm afraid. Right, so just bear with me. I was made redundant the week before Christmas. Oh, crumbs, okay. Can't find a job for the next 6 months. How do I explain what I've been doing that time in an interview? Again, good question. So, well, first of all, Lauren, Happy New Year to you, and I hope things turn around. They probably will, and then you'll look back on this and hopefully have a chuckle. It's a good question, though. I think you were right about the time period. I'd say this was a magic number, somewhere between 3 and 6 months. You've got to find a way of explaining what you've been up to. But if you can find anything else to do, temp work or temporary contract, interim, or anything like that, that of course would help. But if you can do anything voluntarily or anything to explain use of your time, then that will help. But the bottom line is, unfortunately, so many people have been in this kind of situation. It's not unusual anymore, and therefore I wouldn't worry too much about it, Lauren. I think the main thing about your CV, at whatever stage you put it together, is getting across the core strengths you've got to offer. And then, in a way, it's keeping your fingers crossed to a degree. But you'd be surprised how many people make a strong decision about you without reading the whole CV. And so, we're not trying to yeah, we're genuinely not trying to lead people down a garden path or do things that aren't strictly true or honest. But part of the structure of the CV, of course, is to delay the inevitable. So for some people, the structure of our CVs works really well, because we're saying, in effect, this is what I am, this is what I'm good at, here are the skills that I've got, here's the proof to back it up. And then maybe later than most people tend to put, what is their most recent job? Now, for some people that works really well, because as somebody was saying earlier, their most recent job is not the strongest, or there's a gap, or there's something going on. So you can't change that, unfortunately. It'll always come out in the wash, but you can just present your strongest information first, and then you've got to hope that some people will buy into that. And then review the situation. So in your case, I'd say around about Easter time, you want to be thinking about maybe how that's explained. But don't get too hung up about it, because unfortunately, as I said, there are lots of other people who've had similar gaps. So it's not that unusual. Therefore, it's not going to stand out like a sore thumb. 25, 30 years ago, it would have been a much harder issue to deal with, but unfortunately, life has changed. Okay. Salary expectations, where to state when asked in advert. In a covering letter normally, Arthur, unless somebody specifically said, I would very rarely recommend putting salary details or expectations on the actual CV. So I'd put a comment in a covering letter, or sometimes when you apply for jobs, you know, you've got space, you can put in some text online. I'd put it in there. Got a few recommendations on LinkedIn. Should I leave them on? Most from senior leaders here report about 16. Oh, Mukesh, that's really good. Yeah, on LinkedIn, definitely. Sorry, yes, I perhaps should have made that clearer. LinkedIn, doesn't matter how many recommendations you've got, because they're seen as good things and they're helpful. On the CV, I'd extract 2 or 3. There's no hard rule, but it's a balancing act between making sure the CV doesn't go on longer than it should, so you're filling up blank space. Maybe if you've got 2.5-page CV, you can make it full 3 pages with some recommendations off LinkedIn. So it's really, in your case, it's about picking the ones that seem to state the most, the strongest argument to support your case, and maybe 2, 3, 4 tops would be sufficient, but leave all the others on LinkedIn for sure, yeah. Yeah, I would like to apply for a PhD. Okay, thanks for the answer. I would like to apply for a PhD and have no idea about that. Ah, right, okay, so you're actually going for a PhD. Now, okay, that's a good question. Yes, so if you're going for a PhD, then it's sort of understanding what it is that they're expecting in terms of experience, knowledge, qualifications, and just presenting that as the business case to your audience. Again, more detail needed, Mazir, in terms of talking about that to give you best advice. The general principles are the same. There's a set of expectations for the people judging whether you should be allowed to do a PhD, so to speak, and you just need to make sure you're presenting the best case for that. Now, normally, the universities and authorities will spec pretty well. They're normally pretty good at that sort of thing, so you should have a reasonably good idea what they're expecting as the entry qualifications, if you like, or credentials, and then it's just reflecting that on the CV. Larry, see many people adding personal interest or intersection CV advisable. Again, yeah, very good question. I generally say no to personal interests, hobbies, things like that, Larry, unless they're incredibly relevant to who you're applying to. So let's say, for example, 1 or 2 people have said they're trying to make a career change. If the career change involves a hobby you have, that would be an exception to the rule. I once actually, to give you an example, was dealing with a salesperson who I think was selling soft drinks or chocolates or something like that. Who was fanatical about aquatic fish. Fish are aquatic, so aquatics. And it was just a hobby. Just mention it very briefly on his CV. Ordinarily, I'd be saying don't bother mentioning it, but in this particular case, I said mention it because he wanted to get into selling aquatic products to garden centres and what have you. And drawing that out of his CV made the difference, got an interview. But generally speaking, we recommend don't put things because they can infer all sorts, and they just don't add any value unless they're so strong they could get you the interview. Bad example would be if you're a Man United fan and you send it to a Man City fan who's making the decision. Shouldn't make the blindest bit of difference, but unfortunately it just may create some slight tension. Or if you're an ardent, I don't know, cricketer, I suppose, and you happen to support Australia right now and it goes to the wrong desk for some reason, and it shouldn't make any difference, but those sort of things create just an edge. Some things are seen as individual pursuits and people might label you for that. Other things are seen as maybe a bit on the edge of acceptability. Why you'd want to put it on your CV on your age, but some people do. Or it just involves commentary that you might want to avoid. So generally speaking, I'd say don't put them on. Kenneth, thank you. What is the best way to tailor CV for the international market to work abroad? Abby, if you're still on, that's another good question. Depends which part of the world you're heading towards. Most people's CVs, UK, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Asia in most cases, certainly Middle East, Australasia, don't vary a great deal. US don't vary a great deal. If you're going to anywhere in the international market where the dominant company owner is US or Western European, don't need to change at all, other than to state and make it clear that you are, I'm assuming you're based in the UK, just make it clear that you either are prepared to relocate or have the ability to go somewhere pretty quickly, so that people think you're serious, you're well provided for, you've got the credentials, any kind of visa requirements are met. Just mention those kind of things. Other than that, it's just making sure you're presenting a business case. So if the employer is demanding experience of certain sectors, marketplaces, languages, cultural sensitivity, just make sure you're loading the CV with that kind of information, so that when they read it, they're thinking this is not just somebody based out of the UK trying it on for an elongated holiday. It's actually somebody who's serious, because you will get people like that. There'll be people who just think a fancy life change, I'm going to go off and live in New Zealand and let's see what job I can get, or the Middle East, or whatever. So just make it clear that you're a good, strong, valid applicant, and you've got all the criteria that they're looking for, or that you can imagine they're looking for. Carl, thank you very much. Comments appreciated. Ditto Winford. Artur IT. Okay. Artur, just bear with me. I've got to read back. I can remember your name, but I can't remember what you asked in the first place, and if it's still relevant. Oh, how to tailor CV to job spec, and you're in IT. Yeah, okay. So it really depends a little bit on the level you're going for, Artur. But within IT, normally the jobs are pretty similar. So if you didn't have a job spec, but you did a bit of Googling on the kind of jobs that you're interested in, I bet you could find one on the internet somewhere. So hopefully that will help. Mazia, yeah, you'll get a copy of the presentation slides or a link to them tomorrow. Angela, my role within the NHS is about to be put at risk. Self-employed, do not qualify for any of their right management system redundancy package with your. Okay. Again, Angela, just drop me an email on the address you see at the bottom of the screen. Just mark it for my attention, Alistair. And just put any information, particularly current CV if you've got one, take a look at it. Carl, apologies, quick question. Would you put on your personal activities on the CV if they're nothing to do with the job, mountain rescue, volunteer work, and Joyce Fitness? Again, early, I can't remember that's the question earlier. I'd say, Carl, probably not. What I forgot to mention earlier, volunteer work, which you hinted at, that might be relevant. And mountain rescue, I suppose the downside with some of these things, but like if you said you're in the territorial army, to some employers that would be like a horrendous prospect, because it means time off. Got to be a little bit careful. Some of those things are admirable pursuits, mountain rescue, of course, and any volunteer work. Just be a little bit careful, because what you can't possibly tell, I can't tell, you can't tell, and nobody will admit to your face as to whether, if you said you're into mountain rescue and that involved any potential time off, and your potential employer was really sensitive about that, it might work against you, and they'll never say, and they be out of their mind to admit it, unfortunately. But they might just think, oh God, this guy's, he could be involved in a high-risk pursuit. Is he going to need time off? You just don't know. Volunteer work, if it involves working for a known charity, raising funds, that could be relevant to mention. Maybe just in the personal detail section as a bit of an aside. So devil's in the detail, Carl. I'm sorry I can't be more help, but I'd say just be wary. It's not that you shouldn't mention things. It's just if you can't guarantee on how people will respond, it's a 50-50 sometimes, and sometimes worse than that. I appreciate that, Lauren. Thank you. Good night to you, and best of luck. And by all means, contact me if we can be of any help. Christos, how do you handle someone with no experience in the country, UK, but seemingly experience in his own country by way of good presentation? Really good question, Christos, again. Again, if you're wanting to come, I'm assuming there you want to come to the UK to do some kind of job, and if you've got the right experience and skills, then it's presenting that to the best ability you can, the transferable skills, and then just accept that there'll be somebody out there who value those language skills that you potentially have, or cultural experience. There's quite a few people based in the UK who find it really difficult to recruit folk who understand a particular export market. So, for example, if you were, I don't know what discipline you're in, but if you were in sales, there are quite a few companies in the UK who find it really difficult to find good international salespeople, because most people in the UK don't speak languages, or that's a bit of a generalisation, but it's true. And are not very good at the cultural awareness of other international environments, generally speaking. Insular in that regard. So, suddenly opens up possibilities for you, perhaps. It's just presenting that in a positive way, and getting across all the skills that you do have, accepting that for some people, yes, it'll be a big ask because they'll want that UK experience, but you just might find somebody who's actually really keen on getting your other skills, and if they include languages, and I'm taking a bit of a flyer because of your name, but if that's, you've got Greek as a language skills, then, or something similar, actually that's quite valuable. Winford, yeah, thank you, Winford, appreciate that. Ditto, Abby, ditto, oh, Victoria, yes, you'll get a link tomorrow morning, if you're still there, that will explain how you can view this whole thing again. I think I've kept it recording, so you'll get all these questions. If you really want to put yourself through the mill, you can listen to the questions being answered as well. You'll get a link to it all. And that's it. It looks like everybody's done. So I'm going to wrap this up now. For those that are still on, much appreciate your time and attention. It's been a long old session, but hopefully productive. Again, Happy New Year to you all, and you know where we are if we can help. And I'm now going to sign off and bid you good night. Cheers, everybody.